Hello everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood sassy blonde writer coming at you with some writing video. Today we are doing some trope talk about Insta-Romance. We all hate to see it, but we love to write it. Simply put, Insta-Romance is a category of romance tropes where the characters fall in love with each other shortly after meeting. It comes in many different variations and it's very popular. For some reason, it's when the prince dances with Cinderella one night after meeting at his ball and decides he wants to marry her. It's very common in books marketed to teens because, for lack of a better way to put it, it's kind of the adolescent ideal. Who doesn't want the hot guy or girl to fall in love with them after just seeing them dance at the high school prom, or finding them infatuated with you after you order yogurt and they're your cashier? It's a fun idea, but that's all it ever is. The older you get, the more you realize that Insta-Love isn't real. It certainly feels real when you're a teenager, but it isn't real. It's really just an amplified crush or an infatuation, or it's just an attraction you have with someone that you've confused with love. Many books, movies, and TV shows do that, where you consider attraction and love to be the same thing, but that's a topic for another video. Just because you make out with someone doesn't mean you want to grow old together. But back to the topic at hand. So today we are breaking apart the Insta-Romance trope and all the things that go with it, Insta-Love, love at first sight, etc, etc. Before we begin, please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more sassy blonde content from your friendly neighborhood, sassy blonde writer. First things first, let's talk about Insta-Romance. Now, Insta-Romance, I consider its own separate thing from Insta-Love. A lot of people use it interchangeably, which is whatever. Insta-Romance, I consider slightly different because it's usually something like In the Fault in Our Stars, where it has to do with romance or a relationship and not so much to do with feelings for each other. It's like The Fault in Our Stars, where the characters meet a few times, they talk a little bit, then they start dating very quickly after barely really getting to know each other. It usually has to do with the dating side of things, which is why it's more of a modern idea and I consider it a little bit separate from Insta-Love itself, but the terms are usually used interchangeably. It can be done well, like in The Fault in Our Stars, and if you disagree, whatever, let me know in the comments. But most of the time, it's usually because the author is rushing to get through the romance so that way they can start the other parts of the plot. And it usually comes across as something like this. Boy is a nobody. Boy is super shy. Boy meets girl, becomes super charming. They fall in love on page 2, and then they start dating. It usually comes off as very lazy storytelling. It's pretty common to write them because you have other things to do. Also, a lot of the times these characters don't really have a lot of chemistry. The writer pretty clearly forcing these characters to fall in love and not really putting a lot of work into building a romance, establishing their feelings for each other, and then there you go. Also more common when the romance is the B plot in a story, because the writer has a lot of other things that they're doing in the plot and they kind of need to get through the romance so that way they put other things into motion. And it would just be so much easier if these two characters just kissed already so they can focus on saving the world. It's more common Insta-Love in anything other than romance, because I mean, romance novels, it's all about the romance, so it's got to be a slow burn and all that stuff, but it's still really frustrating to read about. The other trope that goes along with Insta-Love is love at first sight. Love at first sight is probably the oldest version of Insta-Love. It's Romeo and Juliet, two crazy kids who fall in love real fast and then die. Or, for a happier version, it's Pride and Prejudice. Jane and Charles Bingley instantly fall in love after dancing with each other at the ball all night. It's definitely one of the older tropes out there. You see each other, you have an instant connection, you decide it's love, and then bam, you're married. You're attracted to each other, so you must be in love, right? Well, this is not a guide to healthy dating and relationships. that only being attracted to each other is not a really good basis for a relationship. And this happens a lot in all pop culture. It's common in musicals as well, where in A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, which is an excellent musical, this one guy has romantic feelings for one girl, but then he's really attracted to this other girl, and so he's like, what do I do? I'm in love with both of them. And the whole time I'm sitting there like, dude, you're not in love with that other girl. You just think she's really pretty and you want to kiss her a lot. Yeah, having that one connection of being attracted to each other, or just having one connection in general, just maybe you just like the same movies or have the same taste in music, that's not really enough to build an entire relationship on. If you want a long-term healthy relationship established in your writing or in the real world, it's not enough to just be attracted to each other and like the same type of music. And that's usually the misstep that's taken with this trope, where yes, they have a crush on each other, yes, they're infatuated with each other when they first meet, but the relationship doesn't move anywhere after that. It's just like, okay, they're in love now, but it never really grows into love from infatuation. Now, there are really good ways to use this trope for a specific purpose. For example, Shakespeare turned the trope on its head in Romeo and Juliet and made it a tragedy, because normally it would just be, and then they lived happily ever after. But no, he made it a tragedy, and also it's kind of a warning of, hey, just because you fall in love with someone and you barely know them might not be the best reason to dedicate your entire life to them. Jane Austen also made the love at first sight romance the B-plot of the book. Pride and Prejudice, spoiler alert, is not about Jane and Charles Bingley. Jane Bennet and Charles Bingley meet at the party. They fall in love, they meet up at other parties, they start to get to know each other more. Then there's a miscommunication between the two of them because one of them thinks that the other doesn't like them as much as they like them, and then they resolve it and then they get married. So the character development happens because of the love at first sight thing. And that's one way you can do it really well. There are going to be some other tips on how to execute these tropes well in a little bit. Is Insta-Love real? Interestingly enough, there's actually a lot of research that has apparently gone into this. I'll link to the articles that I found down below because I was very surprised to see it. What's interesting about the love at first sight idea being real is that sometimes it's confirmation bias is what I've found. And you know, of course it's hard to compare the way you love someone after, you know, spend years together, you've been there for each other through the good and the bad. And then a lot of times people who have been in long-term relationships like months afterwards will look back at when they first met and said, oh yeah, I loved you the moment that I saw you. But like, you went back in time. Would you really have felt that way? Now, there is something to be said for meeting someone and having an instant connection, that spark of conversation, that initial attraction to them. There's something to be said about that. What the article said was that most people who say it was love at first sight usually say it when they're looking back at their memory after they've been together for a while, and not in the moment. They're like, oh, I'm in love with this person, because the fact is that love is not something you feel instantly, it's something that you feel after you get to know each other. So when you're in a relationship together and you look back and you think that, it's called memory bias, where you just remember it this way because you know what happened afterwards. It can also be because you are really attracted to that person, and society tends to intertwine love and attraction together even when that's not the case. So then you could end up telling yourself that you're in love with this person even when you don't really like anything about them. They just have a really nice face or rock hard abs. There's a lot of further reading you can do with the articles down below. Surprisingly, there's a lot of research that's gone into this, but basically love at first sight is either memory bias or attraction. The data has been inconclusive. Now, what you're probably wondering is, how can you do the Insta-Romance or Insta-Love trope well? The fact is that tropes are tropes because they're popular, and that's good because people like them, but that's also bad because that means they've been done to death. So it's really hard to do it in an original way. The best thing you can do with a trope is to try to turn it on its head. So like I was saying, Romeo and Juliet subverts the trope because normally it would be like, they fell in love and then happily ever after, but Romeo and Juliet turns it into a tragedy. Pride and Prejudice turns it into a vehicle for character development. Frozen also subverts this trope because Anna and Hans see each other at the royal ball, instantly connect, and Anna wants to get married because she's never really met other people before, so she didn't really know how to handle this whole situation. Then, spoiler alert, it's revealed that Hans is actually the bad guy and he was completely manipulating Anna the entire time. This subverts the trope because it turns out that Hans didn't actually feel love at first sight like he said he did, and also uses it as a vehicle for Anna to develop as a character, to grow and mature, and then she's able to fall in love with Kristoff because she didn't have any of the pressure of trying to find a husband because she thought she already found one, and then they establish a friendship, and then it's like a whole thing. Here, the Insta-Love mechanism is used to develop character like in Pride and Prejudice, and it's also subverted with a twist like in Romeo and Juliet. Another thing that I personally like to do as a writer is I like to take a trope and then put it to its logical conclusion. You take the trope and give it logical consequences. You can start with a couple that falls in love instantly, start dating really quick, and then you can test their love by giving hurdles. If they clicked right away and they immediately started dating, or in some cases, if they immediately started getting married, what happens when they have their first fight? What if Romeo and Juliet hadn't died at the end? Is it possible that Romeo would have fallen in love with another girl at a party like he did with Juliet? What happens to Cinderella after she's been married for a few months and finds out the prince snores and doesn't pick up his socks? For the two high school sweethearts who started dating senior year and got married after graduation, end up growing together? Or do they resent each other from holding themselves back? That's not a judgment that I'm passing on people who do that, but it is a question that would come up if you were writing a piece that involved that type of relationship. This is one of my favorite ways to play around with a trope and kind of flip it on its head, because a lot of times the trope just exists on its own. There aren't any questions that people ask or any consequences to it necessarily. So that's one of my favorite ways to handle that. That's all I got for you today, folks. I hope you enjoyed this little chat on Insta-Love, Insta-Romance, and all that fun stuff. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button so I know you want more trope talky videos like this. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of my fabulous content, and of course, happy writing!